Sorry, this meeting is for critical team members only, Oliver Barlow announced with a practiced smirk, his hand firmly gripping the heavy glass door of the main conference room. Behind him, 10 of my colleagues immediately averted their eyes, some suddenly fascinated by their digital tablets, others examining their ceramic coffee cups as if studying them for the first time. Through the narrowing gap, I could see my quarterly operational projection displayed on the wall screen, the exact analysis I had sacrificed 4 consecutive weekends to perfect. The door sealed shut with a soft, pressurized click that seemed to echo through the very center of my chest. I stood entirely alone in the carpeted hallway. My graduate degrees and 18 years of experience were rendered meaningless in that silent instant. The polished nameplate on the door reflected my silhouette, a senior analyst reduced to an irrelevant outsider. Something crystallized inside me as I turned away. That closed door was not merely a physical barrier. It was the final, undeniable confirmation of a systematic campaign to erase me professionally. I straightened my shoulders and walked back to my workspace, knowing that this quiet moment would someday be remembered in a very different light. My name is Julian Sawyer. At 48 years old, I carried a solid reputation for rehabilitating struggling operational structures across 3 distinct industries. People in my field described me as highly analytical, observant, and relentlessly focused on systemic solutions. My colleagues often remarked that I could extract absolute order from chaotic corporate environments if given a laptop and a quiet room for 80 hours. What remained invisible to my professional circle, however, was the deep foundation beneath my composed exterior. I was a man who had navigated a childhood in a household where structural discipline and analytical excellence were the only acceptable currencies. My father, a statistics professor who immigrated to this country with nothing but a crate of textbooks and pure determination, taught me that every complex system eventually reveals its internal patterns if you observe it long enough. My mother, a research librarian who cataloged information with reverent precision, showed me that knowledge carefully gathered and organized becomes an unstoppable power when deployed at precisely the right moment. I had joined the company 5 years earlier, bringing my expertise in operational restructuring to a division that had been hemorrhaging both talent and capital. The previous department head had departed suddenly, citing strategic differences with the senior leadership. I later discovered those differences centered on Oliver Barlow's habit of repurposing other people's innovations while constructing elaborate, false narratives to explain away departmental shortfalls. My arrival initially sparked genuine enthusiasm among the team. The department desperately needed a fresh perspective, and my track record of turnaround success spoke for itself. The first 4 months unfolded precisely as I had planned. I observed, analyzed, and developed targeted workflow recommendations that would streamline our development cycle while reducing redundancies across multiple team functions. During my 5th month, I presented my first comprehensive operational analysis to the department. The room hummed with genuine interest as I outlined potential improvements that could save the company millions. Even Oliver, our department director, nodded appreciatively while scribbling notes in his journal. That evening, he stopped by my desk. He perched casually on the edge of the mahogany wood. He told me that my insights were impressive, but suggested we hold off on implementing any changes until we had discussed them more thoroughly. He claimed some of my suggestions might be too ambitious for our current reality. I agreed, not yet understanding that discussing something thoroughly was Oliver's code for indefinite postponement. Over the following weeks, meeting invitations that should have included me, as a matter of course, never arrived. When I politely inquired about the oversight, Oliver's response became a familiar, rehearsed refrain. He would claim that the meeting covered specific aspects outside my current focus area, or that they needed to keep the discussion limited to historical context that I did not possess. By the 10th month of my tenure, the pattern had solidified into an absolute barrier. Strategic discussions happened entirely without my input. The decision-making circles tightened to exclude my voice completely. Yet, my detailed reports were still requested weekly, only to disappear into an administrative void, never referenced in company planning. Oliver constantly explained that he needed me handling the baseline analytics. So, I maintained spreadsheets that nobody consulted and compiled statistics that nobody cited, watching as our department's actual performance steadily declined. Each quarter told the exact same story. We were rapidly losing our market position due to operational bottlenecks. Yet Oliver claimed credit for minor, temporary victories while attributing significant failures to unpredictable market forces beyond our control. The exclusion became increasingly blatant. Once, I arrived early for a division meeting to find my name missing from the printed agenda. Another time, I overheard Oliver telling a new hire that I merely handled data entry and basic reporting, directing them to speak with Roger or Owen for actual strategic guidance. Both Roger and Owen had joined the company 6 months after me and possessed less than half my qualifications, yet they were repeatedly promoted and praised. Most telling was, when our division launched a new operational initiative, it incorporated fragments of my original proposals, but distorted them so heavily that they failed to function. When these partial measures inevitably fell short, Oliver referenced them in executive meetings as evidence that innovation damaged productivity. I considered leaving. I updated my resume and scheduled networking meetings. Yet, something kept me in place. It was a combination of stubborn determination and a deep instinct that opportunities sometimes arrive disguised as defeats. I decided to stay and begin documenting the decline. I tracked every rejected proposal, every missed milestone, and every instance where my copyrighted operational code was copied without authorization. I knew the system would eventually collapse under the weight of its own inefficiency. The turning point arrived on a rainy Tuesday evening. The office had emptied of its usual bustle, leaving only the soft hum of the air conditioning and the cleaning staff moving quietly in the hallway. I remained at my desk, completing an unauthorized analysis that tracked the direct relationship between excluded operational expertise and declining department outcomes. I was essentially documenting how the systematic isolation of key personnel, specifically myself, correlated directly with our negative performance metrics. It was a mathematical proof of Oliver Barlow's failure as a leader. An unexpected voice remarked from behind my shoulder that it was an interesting approach. I turned around to find Diana Vance, our chief executive officer, standing beside my desk with her attention fixed on my monitor. I had not spoken directly with her since my initial hiring interview 5 years ago. I explained that it was just personal research, resisting the urge to minimize the screen. She pulled up a chair and asked to see my findings. For the next 2 hours, I walked her through not just the correlation analysis, but my comprehensive vision for a complete departmental restructuring. I showed her the integrated workflow models, the redundancy assessments, and the talent reallocation plans. Most importantly, I demonstrated the projected performance improvements each change would generate. When I finished my presentation, Diana remained silent for several long moments. She asked how long I had been developing these analyses. I admitted that I had been working on them for 12 months, though they had never been reviewed by department management. Her expression remained neutral, but something sharp shifted in her eyes. She told me to meet her the next morning at 6:30 in her office and to bring everything I had developed. That next morning initiated what would become our secret collaboration. For an hour each day, before the rest of the office populated the building, we refined my analyses into a comprehensive corporate restructuring plan. Diana expanded my database access, enabling me to extend my assessment beyond our department to the entire organizational structure of the firm. She instructed me to continue my normal routine and to say nothing about our discussions to anyone. So, I maintained my outward compliance while my exclusion in the department intensified. The whispers among my colleagues grew louder, and the sidelong glances became more obvious. My department colleagues began bypassing me entirely for information I was specifically hired to provide. Most revealing was watching Oliver appropriate fragments of ideas he had overheard me discussing with junior team members. He presented them in leadership meetings as his own spontaneous insights. These borrowed concepts, completely divorced from their supporting analytical framework, yielded minimal benefits. This further reinforced his false narrative that our department needed stability rather than innovation. Through it all, I documented everything. Each excluded meeting, every dismissed suggestion, and all instances where my work was repurposed without attribution were logged. I also recorded every performance decline that followed our ignored recommendations. This documentation became part of the restructuring evidence that Diana and I assembled each morning. My professional isolation reached its peak 3 months before the official restructuring announcement. Our department faced a critical deadline for a product improvement initiative. Despite having developed the original operational framework for this exact scenario, I received no invitation to the emergency plan session. When I appeared at the conference room regardless, Oliver intercepted me at the threshold. He explained loudly, so that everyone could hear, that they were handling specialized technical aspects that day. He told me he needed me focusing on my regular reports and would circle back if they needed those statistics. I nodded, walked back to my desk, and secretly compiled the data. That evening, I submitted my latest analysis to Diana with a detailed note. The attached performance projections showed that our department would miss its quarterly targets by approximately 24% following the strategic decisions made during that meeting. When the quarter closed with our department underperforming by 25.6%, Diana sent me a simple, one-line response. She wrote that the plan would move forward in exactly 9 weeks. Those 9 weeks tested every aspect of my professional discipline. I attended mandatory meetings where my input was systematically ignored. I watched implementation failures that my excluded analyses had specifically predicted. I maintained comprehensive documentation while appearing to accept my marginalized position. The psychological toll accumulated daily. I questioned whether maintaining my silence served any purpose beyond self-inflicted torture. Some mornings, driving to work required negotiating with myself at every traffic light. I had to convince myself to survive one more day, one more week, or one more pointless meeting where my expertise would be dismissed. Most difficult were the moments when junior team members sought my guidance privately, then presented my recommendations as their own insights in group settings, receiving the recognition that I had been denied. I continued helping them, recognizing that they were simply navigating the same dysfunctional system from different positions. I kept my focus on the larger picture. I knew that the data was on my side, and that Diana was prepared to act. The documentation I gathered was not just a record of personal grievances, it was a legal and operational ledger of a failing corporate structure. I aligned my patience with the timeline we had established, waiting for the moment when the data would speak for itself. 6 days before the planned restructuring day announcement, Oliver Barlow called me into his glass-walled office for my annual performance review. The written evaluation highlighted my attention to detail and commitment to routine tasks while noting concerns about my limited strategic perspective and resistance to collaborative frameworks. He slid the evaluation across his mahogany desk, telling me that he valued my contributions but wanted to set realistic expectations. He asserted that my role was best suited to supporting others rather than directing initiatives, claiming that was where my strengths lay. I signed the evaluations without a single comment, adding it to my digital documentation folder later that evening. The night before the assembly, I barely slept. The weight of the upcoming change pressed heavily on my mind. At 3 in the morning, my phone lit up with a text message from my sister, Clara Sawyer. She was aware of the silent struggle I had endured for months and checked in to see if I was holding up. I replied that the preparations were complete and that the board had officially signed off on the operational realignment. Clara sent back a reassuring message, reminding me of our father's advice that patience is the ultimate form of strategic positioning. I smiled, feeling the tension ease slightly. I prepared with unusual care, choosing a dark blue suit I had purchased months earlier specifically for this day. As I fastened my grandfather's silver watch around my wrist, I thought about his favorite expression. He used to say that patience is not just waiting for the storm to pass, but understanding exactly when to open your umbrella. The company-wide assembly was scheduled for 9 o'clock in the morning in the main conference center. I arrived at 8:30 to find the room already filling with employees from every department, speculation buzzing through the crowd. Several colleagues looked surprised to see me, clearly assuming I would not be included in whatever announcement warranted gathering the entire company. Oliver arrived at 8:45, immediately joining the circle of department heads near the front stage. He did not acknowledge my presence, though I deliberately positioned myself where he would need to pass me. I observed his confident gestures and the easy laughter he shared with peers who accepted his assessment of my limited capabilities. At precisely 9 in the morning, Diana Vance walked to the podium. The room quieted immediately. She began by stating that today the company would implement a comprehensive restructuring based on a 15-month efficiency study conducted within the organization. On the massive screen behind her, the first slide appeared: operational realignment, maximizing internal expertise and eliminating systemic inefficiency. This analysis, Diana continued, identified critical weaknesses in how the company distributed decision-making authority and utilized its internal expertise. Most significantly, she explained, it documented how excluding key personnel from strategic planning directly correlated with decreased departmental performance and significant financial losses. Oliver shifted in his seat, his expression still reflecting polite interest rather than concern. He whispered something to Roger, who smiled and nodded. Before revealing the new organizational structure, Diana announced that she wanted to acknowledge the architect of this entire initiative. She described this person as someone whose potential was systematically overlooked, whose expertise was deliberately excluded, and whose patience had been nothing short of extraordinary. She then extended her hand toward my seat, asking Julian Sawyer to join her on the stage. The room went completely silent as I stood up and walked to the front. Hundreds of eyes tracked my movement, but I focused only on Oliver, whose expression transformed rapidly from confusion to dawning comprehension. For exactly 15 months, Diana continued as I took my place beside her. Julian had conducted the most thorough organizational analysis in the company's history. She explained that I had simultaneously documented how my expertise was systematically excluded from decision-making processes. The screen changed to display a detailed dashboard showing the metrics I had developed. It tracked every meeting from which I had been excluded, alongside the corresponding performance declines in those specific areas. This evidence, Diana explained, demonstrated an undeniable correlation between expertise exclusion and operational failure. She declared that today the company would correct that systemic error. The screen shifted to display the new organizational chart. My name appeared prominently, not just above Oliver's, but heading a newly formed Innovation and Accountability Division with direct authority to evaluate and restructure every company initiative. Gasps rippled through the audience as people processed the massive changes. Diana announced that, effective immediately, I would lead this new division with a mandate to implement the comprehensive restructuring plan I had designed. She added that this position reported directly to her and carried oversight authority across all operational units. I watched Oliver's face as understanding settled over him. His expression cycled through disbelief, shock, and finally a stunned resignation. He clutched his ceramic company mug so tightly that his knuckles turned white, then suddenly released his grip. The mug crashed to the floor, shattering into jagged pieces that scattered across the polished concrete, the sound amplifying in the silent room. He mumbled an apology, not looking at anyone, his face flushed with embarrassment. Diana continued, gesturing toward the chart, explaining that the restructuring preserved existing departments but completely realigned reporting relationships and decision-making authority. The room remained in a state of suspended animation as colleagues began whispering, casting furtive glances at Oliver, who stood motionless. Roger and Owen looked down at their notebooks, suddenly aware of the shifting balance of power. The spotlight of organizational attention centered squarely on Oliver Barlow's department, and specifically on Oliver himself, who seemed to be shrinking into his chair. To ensure proper implementation of the new workflow, Diana Vance continued, each affected department head would participate in weekly public accountability sessions, overseen by the Innovation and Accountability Division. She explained that these sessions would track progress while documenting why these measures had not been adopted sooner despite their proven effectiveness. I maintained my professional composure, but inside a quiet satisfaction bloomed. 15 months of systematic exclusion had transformed into 15 points of structural reorganization, each addressing a specific instance where my expertise had been ignored with measurable consequences. Diana turned the podium over to me to outline the implementation timeline. As I stepped forward, I surveyed the room. Expressions ranged from shock to curiosity to calculation, as everyone assessed how this reorganization would affect their personal positions. My gaze settled briefly on Oliver, who stared at the broken pieces of his mug on the floor, a fitting visual metaphor for his shattered assumptions. I thanked Diana and began speaking, my voice steady and measured. I outlined that the restructuring would proceed in 3 distinct phases over the next 6 months. Today, I would detail the first phase, which was to begin immediately. The first phase of our corporate realignment focused on establishing the core data integration pipelines and standardizing reporting formats. I explained to the gathered staff that we would no longer accept manual reports that could be altered to hide efficiency gaps. Instead, all metrics would be pulled directly from our database systems, creating a single source of truth that could not be manipulated or delayed. This transparent approach would ensure that the operational reality of each department was visible to the entire leadership team. For the next 40 minutes, I detailed the restructuring with precise clarity. I avoided any hint of personal vindication, focusing exclusively on organizational improvement objectives, efficiency metrics, and accountability mechanisms. The presentation I delivered had been rehearsed dozens of times in the early mornings with Diana, refined to ensure it conveyed absolute authority without appearing purely punitive. When I finished, Diana returned to conclude the session. She informed the staff that department heads would receive complete implementation packets that afternoon, and the first accountability session would take place the following Monday at 9 in the morning. As the assembly dispersed, colleagues who had previously ignored me now approached with congratulations and sudden recollections of how they had always appreciated my unique perspective. I acknowledged each person cordially while noting their previous positioning on my mental organizational map. Oliver remained seated as others filed out, still staring at his broken mug. I considered walking past without acknowledgement. It would have been justified after months of deliberate exclusion. Instead, I approached him directly. I told him quietly that we would meet in my office at 3 in the afternoon to discuss his department's implementation requirements. He looked up, his expression unreadable, and asked if I meant my new office. I confirmed that I did, specifying the former strategy room on the executive floor. I added that he would receive the official notification shortly. He nodded, then bent to gather the ceramic shards of his mug. I watched him briefly before walking away. By noon, my belongings had been relocated to my new office, a glass-walled space 3 times the size of my previous workstation, positioned between Diana's suite and the executive conference room. My credentials had been upgraded to executive level, granting me unrestricted access to company data systems and planning platforms. My desk was made of clean walnut, and the room was filled with natural light, providing an environment designed for strategic thinking rather than administrative routine. Simon Fowler, my new assistant, had already organized the folders on my desk and configured the secondary screen so that Oliver and I could review the comparative data side by side. He brought in 2 glasses of water, placing them quietly on the wooden surface before slipping out and closing the glass door behind him. At 2:55 in the afternoon, Simon informed me that Oliver had arrived. I instructed Simon to wait 5 minutes before showing him in, not out of petty revenge, but to establish the boundary of executive timing protocols. When Oliver entered at precisely 3 in the afternoon, I gestured to the chair across from my desk. I thanked him for coming. He sat cautiously, his normally confident posture noticeably diminished. He remarked that he did not have much choice. I responded that we always have choices, but they simply come with different consequences. He glanced around the office, taking in the expanded space. the executive furnishings, and the view of the city skyline, noting that it was quite a promotion. I corrected him, stating that it was not a promotion but a complete restructuring based on documented performance analysis. I emphasized that there was an important distinction between the two, as a restructuring aligns authority with proven operational capabilities rather than political maneuvering. I added that my role was to ensure that expertise was no longer locked out of the decision-making process by managers who felt threatened. Oliver looked away, his jaw clenched, but he knew there was no room for argument. The data on the screen was absolute, and he was cornered by the very rules he had spent years trying to manipulate to his advantage. He finally exhaled, a quiet concession of his defeat, and nodded slowly as he prepared to listen to the new terms of his employment. I opened a digital folder on my monitor, turning the screen so Oliver Barlow could see the contents. This folder contained every instance where recommendations I provided were dismissed, followed by the resulting negative metrics. His expression tightened as he noted that I had been building a case against him. I explained that I had documented systemic inefficiency across the company, and his department provided the clearest evidence. I expanded a specific file. I pointed out that last February, he had rejected my proposal to integrate cross-functional teams, and 6 months later, project completion times had increased by 34% while quality assessments decreased by 28%. Oliver shifted uncomfortably, claiming that market conditions had changed. I interrupted him, bringing up a comparative chart. I explained that these columns showed adjusted projections incorporating market fluctuations, and even with those variables, the gap between my recommendations and his alternative approach remained statistically significant. For the next 40 minutes, I methodically walked him through the implementation requirements. His role had not been eliminated. That would have been predictable revenge. Instead, he would remain as department head, but with a critical new responsibility: implementing every recommendation he had previously rejected, while documenting why these approaches had not been adopted earlier. Each week, he would present his implementation progress and historical context analysis to the executive team. The first session was scheduled for Monday morning. He stared at me, comprehension dawning, and remarked that I had designed a system where he had to publicly admit he was wrong repeatedly. I corrected him, stating that I had designed a system where evidence-based decision-making received appropriate priority. I added that his personal experience implementing this system would provide valuable context for our ongoing structural improvements. His face flushed, and he accused me of sophisticated revenge, making him the public example of failed leadership. I closed the folder on my screen and met his gaze directly. I told him that he had made himself the example through his own consistent, documented choices, and I was simply ensuring the organization learned from those choices. After Oliver departed, I spent the afternoon meeting with other department heads. Some approached our new dynamic with professional pragmatism, others with thinly disguised resentment, and a few with genuine enthusiasm for the restructuring. My final meeting concluded at 7:30 in the evening. The executive floor had emptied except for Diana Vance, who stopped by my office doorway and asked how it felt. I considered the question carefully, admitting that it felt validating but also somewhat hollow. She raised an eyebrow, questioning why it felt hollow after achieving exactly what I had worked toward for over a year. I explained that the goal was never personal vindication, but creating a system where expertise receives appropriate consideration regardless of title or politics, and that work was just beginning. She nodded, agreeing that was why I was the right person for the position. She told me not to stay too late because tomorrow would be demanding. After she left, I stood at my office window watching the city lights. My phone chimed with a text message from my sister, Clara Sawyer. She asked if the restructuring had happened and requested details. I typed back that everything had proceeded as planned, but talking about it felt strange. Her response came immediately, asking if it was because I had won or because winning did not feel like I had expected. I replied that it was both, and told her we would call tomorrow. The morning accountability sessions became the defining rhythm of the company's new structure. Each Monday, at 9 in the morning, Department heads presented their progress. Oliver's first presentation, 3 days after the restructuring announcement, became a pivotal moment. He arrived prepared with comprehensive slides detailing his implementation of cross-functional teams, the very approach he had dismissed 18 months earlier. He explained to the assembled executives that preliminary data suggested a 14% improvement in development efficiency after just 2 weeks. I waited until he finished before asking the accountability question. Given these positive results, please explain why this approach was not implemented when originally proposed last year. The room went silent. Oliver hesitated, then straightened his shoulders and stated flatly that he had rejected the proposal without adequate evaluation. He admitted he believed maintaining established workflows would preserve stability during market uncertainty, but that assumption proved incorrect and cost the company approximately $6 million in lost efficiency over 16 months. His direct acknowledgement shifted the atmosphere in the room. Several executives who had prepared similar deflections for their own sessions visibly reconsidered their approach. As weeks progressed, the sessions transformed from dreaded confrontations into productive analysis forums. Most remarkable was the transformation within Oliver's department. As he implemented each previously rejected recommendation, performance metrics improved. Even Oliver himself demonstrated unexpected adaptability, gradually shifting from reluctant compliance to active engagement. 11 months after the restructuring announcement, Diana called me to her office to review our performance analysis. Every division showed double-digit improvement. Employee satisfaction scores had increased 35% and market valuation was up 30%. Diana added that Oliver had requested a transfer to our international division to establish the accountability framework in our overseas operations. I considered the implications and approved the transfer, realizing that the accountability system I designed was not about permanent punishment but optimal expertise utilization. Later that afternoon, I encountered Oliver in the corridor. He remarked that the system I designed was remarkably effective because it created structural incentives for better future decisions. That was always the goal, I responded. Systemic accountability produces sustainable transformation. As he turned to leave, he asked if I knew how this would unfold when I started. I answered that I knew exclusionary practices inevitably produce operational failure, and the specific path to correction emerged through systematic analysis. That, I told him, is the difference between reactive revenge and strategic restructuring.